Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I have Jon Stine on for a conversation. And I was thinking about whether he qualifies as an everyday entrepreneur, and I decided he does not, because Mr. Stine is, I think, pushing the envelope on a phenomenon in the world which is just emerging, which is voice technology and voice assistance. And that's not an everyday conversation yet. More and more people are having conversations at home with voice assistants, but the actual industry and the architectures is what Jon and a whole community in the Open Voice Network are bringing together to make it easier to use for, well, the rest of us, the everyday entrepreneurs everywhere. So, Jon, thank you so much for joining. Can you share with us a little bit about what is it that you do, and also why are you doing what you're doing?
Well, Chris, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity. And to those of you listening and watching, great to meet you. Jon Stine, I'm based in Portland, Oregon, in the States. And why and what we're doing. Chris, you can think of it as an initiative. Think of it as a push that said several years ago, my goodness, this voice thing is beginning to bubble. It's not yet at a boil. It's not yet, wafting everywhere so everyone can sense it, but it's beginning to bubble. And as it bubbles, gosh, the implications of this could be huge and could be very valuable to entrepreneurs and established enterprises. What would that take? What would it take to make that real? And, when you say that, you realize, and as you point out, I'm not an entrepreneur, but you begin to have to think in entrepreneurial ways of what would it take to make this true? And especially for a technology, and for those of you who are technologists, it's not just the technology that makes an idea come to fruition. And so we began sitting around, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not a technologist by trade, but a business person, and looked around and said, my goodness, in addition to the technology, for this voice thing to have the optimum value for the optimum number of people, it probably needs 3, 4, 5, 6 N additional things to the technology development. One thing led to another, and colleagues, to make a long story short, we've put together a nonprofit organization. It's affiliated with the Linux Foundation, and it's dedicated, right now at least, to developing technical standards, usage guidelines for the future of voice assistants.
And Jon, just to clarify, my point on everyday entrepreneur was that you're not an everyday entrepreneur, because I consider you absolutely entrepreneurial, meaning you've pulled this, open source community of experts of incredible stature, sort of out of the weeds. I'm sure it hasn't been only you, but you've been really, the executive director and driving it in an extremely entrepreneurial way. And there's lots of big brands, hovering around and involved in different ways. So, but I'm curious, with you yourself, you saw this movement coming up, this thing bubbling up. Why did you decide to like what was the inner drive or inner passion that says, I need to craft this thing that's going to impact humanity? Because that's quite an audacious endeavor.
Well, it's some people, and Chris, you're very kind to call it audacious. I've had some people say it's downright foolish or even scary. In fact, I had one individual come up to me, a person I respect a great deal, and stop me and say, you realize you're tugging on Superman's cape. You can get squashed, Jon. I said, yes, well, indeed. Pretty much know that. I mean, there's a high risk of failure, as there is for any entrepreneur. I think, Chris, there's a number of things that come into it. And I have done projects like this through my career, and sometimes affiliated with big companies in doing so. But it's the absolute joy of the intellectual exploration, the absolute joy of bringing brilliant people together, people far smarter than I am, and seeing from where you kind of see nothing happening to see the formation of ideas and the formation of lasting value and the formation of value that can benefit a broader community, a broader ecosystem, anywhere from the children you're trying to learn at home to big enterprises. It's all those things coming together. For me, it's a thrill. It's to give it a shot, to give it a try, to explore this. And it was in that way, it was easy for me to leave a prior position and take this on.
And the community is sizable and growing. I'm a member of the, I guess, architectural component committee, and we're working on, solving architectural problems and imagining architectural problems sometimes, because it's even ahead of the curve on where, the technology and the large vendors actually are. How big is the community, and what are the different things that they're working on? Because there is an overall, master plan, and sometimes I feel like you're a bit of the puppet master pulling all of these strings and making really interesting things happen. So what is the big picture as far as maybe the outcome or the benefit of open voice network?
Well, Chris, thank you. And I would maybe the one thing I do, not being the puppet master, but I think for all entrepreneurs, is you have a bit of a vision and you get others to walk into the dark cave with you, and you light a candle. And to giving, one of my jobs is just showing what's possible, or helping people think what's possible, or giving people room, because I'm not the one with the ideas, giving people room to envision what's possible. Chris has a colleague, as many of you know, a fellow by the name of Martin Lens Fitzgerald, who is based in Amsterdam. Brilliant fellow when it comes to voice. Giving Martin a place to explore and expand. Giving Chris here, our colleague here on the line, a place to expand and explore, and to be bringing others together who have that same vision or that same interest, who would want to explore the cave together. And if there is someone holding a candle and accompanying, not even leading, but just accompanying so that light can be shown, we can all explore and we can all find, and we say, oh my goodness, look at that. Look at that. The things we're looking at, Chris, are, and I think this gets back to the entrepreneurship, is what are the things that need to be true for this voice phenomenon to reach its, let's say, optimal value for the most people? And you ask, what are those things? Well, it can be such as the use cases. That how do you create value with voice? Let's just assume it works. How do you create value with voice? What are the business processes that can be affected? How do people interact with voice? And so we have groups that are working on use cases. If you use voice in this way, we can reduce operational costs by this much, or we can pick more orders faster using this technology. So that's one. A second is the whole privacy and ethical use. Gosh, you take a look at voice data, and it's not just what you say, but it's how you say it. It's a biomarker. It's a biometric. The researchers at MIT can tell us, we can begin to detect leading indicators of Parkinson's and schizophrenia and even COVID-19 through voice. Well, that raises all kinds of, what do you do with it? My goodness, what do you do with this data? How do you protect privacy? How do you respect GDPR, CCPA? But maybe there are situations, let's say in healthcare, where you want to use some of that, let's say, biomarker data, a very complex topic. So we're looking at ethical use and privacy and security from a user's perspective. And then third, again, what must be true for this to create value? Look at it from a user's, a customer's perspective. Yes, there are the great voice platforms, which all of us know, and they've done a tremendous job of developing this technology and making it a day-to-day phenomenon. But the future of voice is increasingly in creating independent voice assistants that an organization would have. It could be your local university could have their own. They're a business, a retailer, a manufacturer will have their own independent voice assistants. Well, those voice assistants need to talk to one another. So how do you create interoperability, for instance? Chris, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Well, you interrupted me interrupting you. Sorry for that. But when you said that university, for example, will have its own voice assistant, I just want to clarify for people listening that they will have their own voice assistant system, like they have in, an ERP system or an e-commerce system. So they will be in the future managing this as a capability, within their organization, to interact with their students. And okay, so if University A, B, and C have, their own voice assistant ecosystems, how can you have conversations across that landscape? And so I just wanted to clarify that.
No, Chris, thank you. You said it very, very well. If you have a website today, you will have your own voice assistant tomorrow. Think about that. When we think about, are you using artificial intelligence today? Well, I had a futurist friend, a very brilliant individual, say, if you're using artificial intelligence, the interface to all artificial intelligence will be voice. Every AI will be conversational. That's billions of voice assistants out there. But again, if you have a website, you will have an independent voice assistant. Now, how do they talk to one another? How do they connect to one another? Who owns all that data? All huge questions that we're trying to answer.
And how do you keep that data safe and respect, people's privacy along the way? So
exactly.
For those that might be listening and wondering, what are we talking about? Can you share just your definition of voice in this context?
Let's use, and Chris, thank you. It's a great question, and I should have started with that. But voice assistance is the ability right now, and at the simplest phase, is the ability of a human to speak to a computer of some sort, and for the computer to speak back. For that digital software package resting on a device to understand what I am saying, translates my voice through artificial intelligence into a text, which then is understood, and a response is created from anywhere out there. And that's translated back into speech, which then speaks back to me. So I can say, hey, Google, I have Google assistants in my home. Hey, Google, what is the weather today? And my Google device is now warming up, and I did turn it down so it won't interrupt this. There we go.
Yeah, there it is.
And it's speaking back to me. And
sorry, I didn't understand.
Hey, Google, turn off. It is that remarkable process. And at the simplest level, colleagues, it is you change the channels on your television through your voice. Go from this channel to this channel. You select the music on Spotify. I don't want to hear Paul McCartney anymore. I want to hear George Harrison. Yeah. And it is directing your life, which has been through your fingers and screens. It's doing that by voice. People, the linguists tell us that voice is the zero interface. It's the interface we first had as infants. It's the natural interface we have used. And we've created through technology all these different intermediaries, typewriters and touchscreens and keyboards and this and that and QWERTY systems and on and on and on. But the simplest, most inclusive, if we do it right, the most inclusive for all is the zero interface. It's voice.
So if there's entrepreneurs or small business owners or even corporate executives that are going, wow, hadn't thought of that. Where would they start on this? Meaning where would they based on the capabilities that are now, what is something that a business owner or business manager could do to start the journey into the realm of voice assistance?
Gosh, Chris, it's a great question. There'd be several things that one would suggest. The first is begin to understand, just step back and begin to think and learn a bit where this thing is going. And you don't have to turn yourself into a voice assistant tomorrow. You don't have to say, oh my God, I have to have a voice assistant here within the end of the year. But know that increasingly, and let's use US data as an example, some 45% of all internet users, and those are younger, generally higher income, digital natives, use voice on a regular basis. So on a demographic perspective, this is a wave that's coming toward you. This is a tide that is reaching the shores here very soon. We're all going to have to be dealing with it. Individuals who not only use voice, but will expect voice. And that's 2022, 23, 24. The growth of what Deutsche Telekom is doing with Magenta, the work that's happening in the Netherlands, the work that's happening with the Beeb in the UK. Even if we conclude the UK in the EU, it's coming to the continent. It's coming to the EU. It will be expected. So that's the first step. The second step is to ask where and how this can create value. It's not to go out and create a voice assistant. One of the great ways to create value with voice right now is simply in customer service. If you're running a call center, or just ask, are my phones being answered on a regular basis, 100% of the time with 100% accuracy? Most likely not. How can you provide those frequently asked questions responses through voice assistance, through a bot? Where could you, let's say if you're a retailer, give advice on when the store is open, when the store is closed, what do you have in availability? These are things that people respond to. And the interesting thing is that generally, although we all love humans, we love accuracy and reliability more.
Absolutely. And yeah, this accuracy and reliability. And just for the sake of clarity, in call center land, there's a thing called IVR, interactive voice response, which is basically a choose your own adventure. So you keep getting asked questions and never get anywhere oftentimes. And in this case, if you had I think a well-designed voice assistant, it would be much more, I don't know, human-esque. I mean, it's much more natural. And the voice assistants, and I'll pass it back to you to see how can they do this. Can also determine different types of intent and context based on tone and other things that can make them respond in slightly different ways to see if this is an urgent thing or if this is someone just sort of doing very mundane admin work. So based on that, they could almost be even more valuable or create more value than actually having humans manning the call center. Well, what's your feeling of AI as being more valuable than humans?
Well, Chris, and certainly I'm an AI creates jobs, should not take away jobs. But let's just think about the scenario that Chris just gave us there. First of all, we know that humans, customers, prefer reliability and accuracy generally, and bots don't have a bad day. Sometimes call center people do, or people answering the phone do. So let's think about that for a moment. But a second thing to think about is that voice AI doesn't just talk. Voice assistance listens. Now, when you And you have to take care of the data. You need to anonymize the data. You need to be very careful with the data. There's a number of guidelines you do with the data. But when you have voice assistants, you basically have a focus group of thousands, if not millions, of individuals on even a daily basis. Are they happy when they call? Are they frustrated when they call? Are they angry when they call? What are they calling about? Are they all looking for a certain toy during the Christmas season? Or are they frustrated because you're out of stock if you're a retailer? Frustrated with the service you provide? Voice is listening as well as talking, because it's voice assistance, but it's really conversation that we get to, and we have the opportunity for interaction and ultimately dialogue. The third thing to think about is this voice that you're communicating and your ability to listen is directly, corresponds to your brand and your brand persona, your brand image. What does your brand sound like? Does your brand sound like Chris? Sound like me? Or maybe it's a cheeky young woman. Or maybe it sounds like your mother because you want to be warm and reassuring. Who is your brand? Because we as humans personify things. There's also a study that has indicated that sometimes voices are much more believable when they speak like Rosie the robot, because people think it's coming from a computer. Therefore, it's more accurate. All that to be considered, but how it is said, as we all know from our human interaction, can be as important as what is said. Also something, Chris, to your great question, it's key issues to consider from an entrepreneur's and a brand's perspective.
I'm curious what you, in my history, when we were introducing mobile apps in Europe for a large corporate, back when mobile apps were new, and we were, mobilizing the processes in order to, create value. We got a bunch of iPhones and gave them away to the executive team, literally to play with, to experience. A couple of weeks before we basically pitched a, investment request and a strategy to them. What's your feeling for playing with it to discover and maybe do some serious playing at work or at home, or just buy a box of these Google or Alexa devices and sprinkle them around and see what sparks?
I think it's a brilliant idea, Chris. And one of the things I did, I got involved with voice and didn't have a voice assistant at home. And I said to my wife, well, we've got to solve that. So we now have 4 in our house. And it is, and in playing, questions come up. Gosh, I wonder if that would be good. And especially from an entrepreneur's perspective, might we do this for our company? Or how would this be for our brand? Or are people really communicating this way? And so just the playing with it and, doing crazy stuff. Hey, play me the Beatles, or play me this, or play me that. And I say the Beatles, it shows how old I am. It begins to really spark ideas and the what ifs that are critical to entrepreneurial development.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a great idea.
So play. And then if you're in a kind of corporate architecture, there are open source platforms like Raza that you could check into that would allow you to maybe experiment in Raza has an open source as well as an enterprise version. But those are, I think, low barrier to entry ways to, put your pinky toe
Absolutely.
into the space.
Yeah.
For a corporate organization to take some first moves, would something like Raza or something comparable to that be interesting for them? Is that a fun way to play? Because those are already pretty robust systems.
There's a lot of players in the marketplace, and Chris, to your great question, it would depend, I think, a bit on the vertical industry you're in. Some of the great players out there, more experience or less experience. If you're in automotive, you might go this way. If you're in retail, you might go this way. Healthcare, you might go this way. And so, offline can certainly share those, names of who's working who. I think it's also even starting with the skills and actions on some of the established platforms, just to dip your toe in the water, as you say, you splash around a bit, and so on the IVR, the voice assistance for customer service, the skills and actions, but then thinking about it's not about how do I do voice? It's how will my customers want to connect with me is the question. And
Well,
how do I make
yeah.
it most easy for them to connect with me and the things they want with me?
Well, those are words close to my heart, as basically being, an enterprise technology person, CIO, CTO type person. The reason I've fallen in love with customer experience management and customer journey design is exactly that. Because if you aren't taking that outside in view to find out what's actually valued by the customer, well, you can have a whole lot of fun and spend a whole lot of money and get a whole lot of nothing done, or even worse, piss off your customers. Going back to that IVR topic,
without question, yeah.
Yeah, and so starting from that outside in to discover, okay, well, and I loved your brand, that point 3, which is the brand personality, and literally I hadn't even thought of that. Disney could have Mickey Mouse answering the phone consistently. I'd probably just call just to talk to Mickey, but maybe that would create the wrong sort of behavior in their customer base. So, looping back to Open Voice Network, this is it's an open community. So, what could people do to contribute or to get involved or support this? I guess I would call it a movement or community.
It's a community, and it's also an initiative, and it's a community coming together to accomplish a number of, I think, very important things for the future of voice. Several ways. Certainly, we have a level of tier 1 enterprises who are providing financial sponsorship, and that, we're not asking that of everyone. Not everyone can do that. Tier 1 enterprises, yes, and can and perhaps should. And what that does, Chris, and as you know from being part of our conversations, we're going to come to a point where we're going to need to have someone write code, where we're going to need to do lab pilots, where we're going to need to create some tangible things. And that just takes a step beyond what we can ask of volunteers. So we'll need to be hiring some folks, and that's what that money will enable us to do, as well as continue the outreach and the day-to-day management of it. I think, however, more as important, if not more important, and all of you out there who are listening, people ask, what do you need, Jon? Well, sponsorship, of course, but we need the best committed minds. If you have the technical expertise and or you have a belief and a desire for the future of voice assistance, a technology, a tidal wave that is coming toward us, that future of voice assistance will be open, will be available, will have a level playing field, will provide choice in vendors, and most all will be worthy of your trust at multiple levels. You're welcome, and there's a place for you. And you can be doing that by serving on our technical committees. You can be part of our usage or use case, ethical use communities. You can be part of our outreach effort. There's a lot of different places for you. And we're a volunteer organization. We're also guilt-free. So if you can do it this month, you can't do it next month, we get it. That's part of the DNA of the OVN. But there's a place for you, and we'd welcome it.
Well, let me dive down that rabbit hole a little bit and share some of the things you were speaking about earlier today. Although this episode will be published in a couple of weeks. These were some topics that were still blowing my mind. Meaning my mind has not yet quite clicked on how to comprehend what we're trying to achieve, which is having different organizations. We talked about the universities a bit earlier. Different organizations having their own voice assistants, their own platforms. However, to create a truly seamless omni-channel experience for that human to talk to machines of 3 or 4 or 10 parties. And today we were talking about, ordering milk. And so, okay, you go to your store and then you have to, ask for your milk to get there. And then there's a payment. And then maybe you get handed off to the PayPal voice assistant. And somehow that needs to be at the human level acknowledged that I'm talking to PayPal now, or maybe PayPal talks like this, and then maybe, your grocer talks, or whatever it is that, and then in order for those agents in that, because I'm looking at this as really like a sort of a complex adaptive system, almost a sort of an agent-based universe where my conversation might bounce back and forth between organizations, and the context and the intent has to maintain itself all the way back, because while we appreciate accuracy, we hate even more having to repeat our account number to multiple people on the same conversation. And just the fact that, and the reason why it's breaking my brain is, having been a lot involved in e-commerce and omni-channel and stringing systems together, microservices, having almost independence for that user experience to flow across organizational boundaries is, well, this is, I think, where the audaciousness comes into me. I'm like, wow, this is just cool stuff. How are we going to solve this? And fortunately, there's people there much smarter than me as well, and contributing in every little way that I can. So it's so is that sort of the vision that you're seeing out there? And so if we blow the audience's mind a little bit, how far will this go?
Chris, it's a great question, and it makes my head hurt as well. And when I sit down with a futurist I mentioned a moment ago, and Steve said to me, every AI will be conversational. Let that sink in. And so the vision that you just shared, this network of agents, of interacting, and maybe they're speaking among each other. We don't know, but billions, not millions, not tens of thousands, but billions of conversational agents. So we look out in the future, but it's a question, envision this scenario. And colleagues, this is what we're trying to solve for. We term this the Suzanne question because it starts with Suzanne, who is the traveler. And we're in a post-COVID world. The masks have come off, thank God. But Suzanne is a Lufthansa loyalty mileage person. Suzanne speaks to the Lufthansa agent. She books a flight to Chicago. She's going to visit her long-lost cousin. Then Suzanne will need, because then she's traveling on, Suzanne will need a hotel. And her conversation and the context of her conversation is then going to Hilton. Book me in the O'Hare Hilton, or book me in the downtown Chicago, Michigan Avenue Hilton, or book me there. And then it's taking her to, because she wants to see a great performance of the Chicago Lyric Opera, because they have a visiting conductor coming in from Deutschland who she just adores. She wants tickets. And that conversation is then shared to the Lyric Opera virtual assistant. And then she realizes, but I'm in Chicago and they have some of the best Midwestern steaks. I know my cousin will want a steak dinner. Let's go to the virtual assistant of Harry Carey's restaurant. They're on State Street. Boom, 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 boom. The context, the dialogue is all shared. And we get to Harry Carey's steak restaurant on State Street, downtown Chicago. That dialogue has been shared across independent voice assistants with the security, with the privacy, and with the key elements of that dialogue now being shared in a commonly understood way. Gets to Harry Carey. Good evening, Suzanne. I understand you'd like a reservation for 2. Suzanne says yes, or it could be Hilton is reserving a table at Harry Carey's for Suzanne on her behalf because she's a loyalty member. But again, independent voice assistants, dialogue moving between them, where the data is owned by Suzanne.
These are, and there's so many different, permeations of this on that whole journey that it's, and I think that's where sort of the Suzanne conversations will be interacting with each other as well. And I think the solving that puzzle in order to achieve every AI communicating via voice is one of what I think is one of the breakthroughs that we need to solve in sort of in this day and age. Because also people, we've had some conversations before, people who are disabled, maybe they're not able to type and things like that, and then this just will unlock so much freedom back to people who had been disadvantaged or disabled or for whatever reason.
Welcome back to the digital world.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the digital world. You're now a citizen of this digital world, whether you're a person with disabilities, on and on and on. Welcome back to the digital world.
Outstanding. So, Jon, I'm appreciating this. We're starting to wrap up. Martin Lenz Fitzgerald, who you mentioned earlier, has been on this podcast. So if you want, if people are listening, they can go to ebullient.com/podcast/Jon Stine. And in there's the link to the Open Voice Network series. And you can find Martin and also Hans van Dam from the Conversation Design Institute. And I'm certain there's going to be more of our colleagues from the Open Voice Network on here, because I am really, like we did today, trying to pick their brain a little bit, distract them slightly from these deep architectural things and say, okay, well, how can the average business now benefit from this and be prepared for tomorrow? So is there maybe a last parting recommendation? I don't know what, maybe video, book, somewhere for people if they want to play and consume the power of voice assistance to really let it land. Do you have any recommendations?
Just play with it, Chris. I think your suggestion of just dip your toe in the water. If you're an Android or Apple, a smartphone user, use voice. Find out how it works. See how it works for you. Understand the weaknesses as well as the strengths. And know this tidal wave is approaching our shores. And it's going to be affecting each one of us, especially as we seek to communicate and interact with our clientele, our constituents, our customers.
I'm going for for people who haven't played, this is something that I experienced around my house a lot. If you talk to Siri on your Apple and you ask Siri how to beatbox, you will be entertained. So my suggestion is for people to be really practical. If you've got an iPhone or MacBook or anything that has Siri on it, enable Siri if it's not already done, and saying, "Hey Siri, can you beatbox for me?" And you will be delighted. So great. Jon Stine, the executive director of the Open Voice Network, and that's openvoicenetwork.org. Openvoicenetwork.org. And I'll also put links to Jon's LinkedIn, and it's a large and growing community. If you are a tier 1 corporate that wants to get involved in this, I'm sure Jon would love to hear from you. And if you are a passionate expert in use cases or technologies, likewise, please join the community and help this initiative move forward. So Jon, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, and best wishes, everyone.
Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player, and download the Simplicity Kit from ebullient.com.